The hallway of the executive wing was silent, the kind of silence that usually meant everyone had gone home to their families. I was just heading to the copier to finish the reports for the 8 a.m. briefing, but as I passed the heavy oak doors of Conference Room B, a voice stopped me cold. It wasn't just any voice. It was Scott. I'd seen him dozens of times, usually bringing Ilya coffee or waiting for him in the lobby with that polished, perfect smile. But that smile wasn't in his voice now. "Ilya is brilliant, but he's become a liability," Scott said, his tone as sharp as a razor. "I know his weaknesses better than any of you. If we move on the vote tomorrow morning, he won't even see it coming. By noon, I'll be acting CEO and Ilya will be out." My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was sure the board members inside could hear it. Ilya, the man who had given me a chance when no one else would, was being sold out by the man he shared a bed with. The voice belongs to Scott Aldrin. I know Scott the way you know anyone who orbits someone important, peripherally but with accumulated detail. He's been Ilya Vaskov's partner for 2 years. I've seen him in the lobby a dozen times, in the elevator maybe half that, at the company holiday event last December, where he stood beside Ilya with that particular brand of easy confidence that reads as warmth from across the room and as something more calculated up close. He's handsome in a symmetrical, deliberate way. He always knows your name when he doesn't need to. That's not a compliment, I realize now. Knowing names you don't need is a form of accounting. But the voice coming through that door doesn't have the lobby smile in it. There's no performance in it. It's stripped down to its actual function, which is precision. He's saying, and I am standing stock still against the wall beside the door, my copy folder pressed to my chest, not breathing. He's saying, "Ilya is exceptional. I want that on record because what I'm about to propose has nothing to do with his capability and everything to do with his trajectory. He has stopped listening, not to me, to the board. The Hargrove acquisition, the structural reorganization, the Carver exit, all unilateral, all brilliant, and all made without meaningful consultation. That is not a CEO. That is a sovereign, and we are not a monarchy." There's a murmur in the room, at least 4 other voices, low, suited, non-committal in the way that powerful people are non-committal when they're actually already committed. Scott continues, and his voice gets quieter, which somehow makes it worse. "I know his patterns. I know where his confidence outpaces his information. I know which board members he's already written off and which ones he thinks he's secured. He hasn't secured them. Not the way he believes he has. If we call the emergency vote tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. before he arrives, before he's had time to read the room, we have the numbers. The motion carries. He's out by noon. I step in as acting CEO under Article 9 of the operating agreement, pending a full board search, which I will, of course, manage." Another murmur. Then one voice, older, a man. I'll think of him as the voice because I can't see his face, and if he contests it? And Scott says, very quietly, like he's already thought about this, in bed, in the dark, next to the man he's planning to dismantle. He'll contest it. He contests everything, but contesting requires time, and time requires allies, and the allies he thinks he has inside this building are professional loyalties, not personal ones. They'll adapt. I know this because I know him. I stand there for what is probably 45 seconds and feels considerably longer. Then my body finishes processing what my mind already understood, and I walk, carefully, quietly, in the particular way you walk when you are trying to seem like you are always just walking, to the copy suite. I make my copies, I collate them, I ride the elevator down, I go back to my desk in the bullpen and I sit down and I stare at the Hargrove footnotes I spent 4 hours rewriting. I sit there for 26 minutes. Then I close the file, put on my coat, and go home. I lie awake until 4 in the morning doing the kind of math that doesn't show up in any spreadsheet. The variables are what I know, what I can prove, who would believe me, what it would cost, and what it would cost not to. I don't sleep. Not really. I drift into something that has the shape of sleep without the restoration, and at 6:15, my alarm goes off, and I get up and I go back. Because Ilya Vaskov approved my hire personally, because 18 months ago he sent a 3-line message to our whole team when our Meridian analysis saved the firm $4 million in a single quarter. Because once, in the elevator, he looked at me not through me, which is what most executives do, which is what I expect, but directly at me, and said in that precise, dry way of his, "The footnotes on the Carver deck were the best part of that whole presentation, Mercer. Most people don't understand that the footnotes are where the actual argument lives." He'd read my footnotes. He'd remembered my name. I'm gonna warn him. I just need to figure out how to do it without Scott finding out and without losing the job that I've spent 3 years trying to deserve. The thing about Ilya Vaskov is that he is not approachable. That's not a criticism. I've thought about this a lot, even before last night. He runs cold in meetings, not dismissive, not unkind, just economical. He says precisely what is necessary and then he stops talking. He doesn't do small talk. He doesn't perform warmth for the sake of it. Most people read that as arrogance. I've always read it as something else, an almost excessive respect for other people's time, including his own. He's never once stayed at a company event past the minimum polite duration. He's never forwarded a motivational email. His feedback, when it comes, is specific and technical and occasionally surgical in a way that is only painful if you mistook mediocrity for good work. I find him honestly easier to understand than most people, which is not the same as knowing how to walk into his office on a Wednesday morning and say, "Your partner is staging a coup and the vote is in 40 minutes. I get to the office at 7:15. The copy suite is done. The briefing documents are stacked. Diana arrives at 7:30, drops her bag, looks at my face and says, and I can hear her voice in my head even now, that particular Diana cadence, flat and precise and warm underneath. "You look like someone who slept inside a problem. What happened?" I tell her I had a long night with the Hargrove footnotes. She gives me the look she gives me when she knows I'm lying, but has decided to let me lie for now. And she goes to get coffee, and I sit at my desk and watch the clock move toward 8. At 7:52, I make a decision. I don't have proof. I have a voice through a door and a folder of copies I made while standing in the hallway, and the memory of Scott Aldrin's measured, deliberate calm when he described removing the man he lives with. I have nothing that would survive a formal challenge. What I have is the truth, and the truth without documentation is just an accusation. And an accusation from a junior analyst against the CEO's partner is a spectacular way to end a career. But Ilya is about to walk into a vote he doesn't know is coming, and I know the only person in this building who deserves to know that is him. I take the stairs to the 10th floor. Ilya's office. I've been here twice in 3 years, once for a project review, once to drop a physical document that needed his signature before Diana could reach him. Both times I stood in front of his assistant's desk. I've never been past it. His assistant, a woman named Petra, who has worked for him for 6 years and has the particular stillness of someone who has processed a great deal of important information without showing it, looks up at me when I arrive. I say, "I need 5 minutes with Mr. Vaskov, please, before 8. She looks at me for a moment, that measuring kind of look that good gatekeepers have, where they're calculating your urgency against the cost of disturbing him, and then she picks up the phone, says something quiet, and hangs up. She says, 3 minutes. Don't make me regret it." I go through. Ilya's office faces northeast, which means on rainy mornings it's gray and close, and the city beyond the glass looks like a photograph of itself. He's standing at the window when I come in, not looking at me yet. He has his coffee. The green tea, I realize, from the place 3 blocks away. Someone got it for him. Old habit maybe, or maybe he started getting it himself. He turns when I close the door. He looks at me the way he always looks at people. Direct, unhurried, like he's decided to give you his complete attention and waiting to find out if that was the right call. He says, "Mercer, what is it?" And I open my mouth and I think about how to frame this carefully, how to present the data without overstating the evidence, how to be precise and credible and not sound like a man who has been awake since 4 a.m. catastrophizing in his own apartment. And what comes out is, I overheard Scott last night in conference room B. He's called an emergency board vote for 8 a.m. this morning. The motion is to remove you as CEO. He says he has the numbers. I believe he's right. The silence that follows is the longest 4 seconds I've personally experienced. Ilya doesn't react the way I expected. I think I expected something: anger, disbelief, the defensive reflex that most people have when confronted with something that threatens them. Instead, he just looks at me, that same direct, unhurried look, and then he does something I genuinely did not anticipate. He sits down. Not in defeat, it's more like the specific movement of someone who just received information that requires them to stop using energy on posture and start using it on thinking. He sets the green tea down. His hands are very still. He says quietly, "Tell me exactly what you heard. Not the summary, the words." So I tell him, all of it. Article 9 of the operating agreement, the board members he thinks he's secured, the professional versus personal distinction Scott made, the noon timeline. I tell him all of it, standing in front of his desk at 7:56 in the morning, and he listens without interrupting, which is somehow more intense than being interrupted. When I finish, he is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "How long have you worked in strategic development?" I blink. 3 years? You rewrote the Hargrove footnotes last night. It's not a question. He knows. Of course he knows. That's why you were on the 8th floor. Yes. He looks at me for another moment. Then he reaches for his phone and begins making calls, and he says, without looking up, "Close the door on your way out, Mercer, and don't talk to Scott." I close the door. I stand in the hallway outside Petra's desk for approximately 3 seconds. Then I go back down the stairs to my desk, to my spreadsheets, and I wait to find out what happens next. What happens next is nothing visible. That's the maddening thing about a war at the executive level. It doesn't look like anything from the outside. It looks exactly like a Wednesday. People get coffee, the printers run, someone in accounts has a birthday, and there's a cake in the break room by 11. I sit at my desk and I do my work, and I am very aware of the fact that I am doing my work in the middle of something I can't see, which requires a specific kind of patience I'm not sure I have. At 9:12, Diana drops a folder on my desk and says in a voice low enough that only I can hear it, "The board meeting that was scheduled for 8 this morning was canceled at 7:59, rescheduled for next week. Anyone want to explain that to me?" I look at her. She looks at me. She says, "The long night with the Hargrove footnotes?" "Yes," I say. She picks up the folder and walks away, and doesn't ask again. And this is one of the many reasons Diana Kwan is the best supervisor I've ever had. At 11:30, I see Scott in the lobby. I'm heading to get lunch from the cart on the corner, and he's crossing the atrium in the direction of the elevators, and we make eye contact for approximately 1 second. His expression doesn't change. That perfect lobby smile, deployed automatically, and he says, "Shane, right? Long day?" "Standard Wednesday," I say. He nods once and keeps moving. I stand outside for 10 minutes in the November cold, eating a sandwich I don't taste, thinking about the way he said my name. He didn't need to know my name. That's still not a compliment. I go back inside. At 3 p.m., I get a message from Petra. It says, "Mr. Vaskov would like to see you. 6th floor conference room, 4 o'clock. Bring the Hargrove analysis." I spend the next hour rebuilding every version of the Hargrove analysis I have. After a moment, he sets the tablet down and looks at me. I put the Hargrove analysis on the table. He doesn't touch it yet. He says, "I want to explain something to you, because you deserve an explanation for what I'm about to ask. The vote this morning was forestalled. Marcus Bell, he's on the board. You don't know him. He's sympathetic to me. He's been documenting the irregularities in how the emergency session was called. The process was procedurally flawed. Scott moved too fast, and he skipped a required notification step. It gave me a window." I say, "Okay." The window is small. Scott will call another session within a week, correctly this time. When he does, I'll need to have demonstrated in concrete terms that my decision-making on the Hargrove acquisition was not unilateral, but was in fact based on analysis that the board had access to and chose not to engage with, which means I need the trail of documentation showing that the analysis existed, was circulated, and was accurate. I look at the folder I brought. Then I look at him. The footnotes, I say. The footnotes, he agrees. And that's how I end up working directly with Ilya Vaskov. Over the next 4 days, we meet every evening in the 6th floor conference room, always after 6 when most of the floor has cleared, always with the door closed. He brings the green tea. I bring whatever version of the analysis I've been rebuilding during the day. I want to be precise about what this time is, because it would be easy to describe it incorrectly. It is not comfortable, exactly. Ilya doesn't do comfortable. He does functional. He doesn't make small talk before we start, doesn't ask about my weekend or how I'm finding the new coffee machine. What he does from the very first evening is treat my analysis like it matters. He reads every line. He questions the parts that need questioning, not to undermine them, but because he's genuinely interrogating the logic, the same way I would. When something is good, he says it's good. No inflation, just, this methodology is sound, or this is the right framing. The first time he says, this is the right framing about a section I'd rebuilt from scratch at 2 in the morning, I feel something shift in my chest that I am not yet prepared to name. What I can tell you is that I started working harder than I've ever worked. Not because I'm afraid, because I want to be accurate. I want to be the person he's reading when he reads my analysis. On the second evening, he asks me why I warned him. We've been working for about an hour. He's reviewing the Carver exit documentation I found in the archive, tracing the paper trail of board communications. He doesn't look up when he asks. He just says, quietly, "You didn't have to come to me. You understand that. The risk to you was significant." I think about several answers. I give him the true one. "You read my footnotes," I say, "on the Carver deck 18 months ago. Most people in your position don't read the analyst footnotes. You did. And then you remembered them. I've never forgotten that." He's quiet for a moment. Then he looks up. He has this quality when he actually looks at you, really looks, not the quick professional scan, but the full thing. It's like a light coming on in a room you didn't realize was dim. He says, "I remember them because they were the clearest thinking in the whole presentation. The senior analysts were performing confidently. You were just telling the truth." I look at the table, then at the window. Then I say, "That's what I was trying to do this morning, too." He says, "I know." We go back to work. On the third evening, something goes wrong. I'm in the copy suite running the latest documentation when the door opens and Scott walks in. He's carrying a phone and he looks slightly surprised to see me, and for a half second I can see the calculation happen behind his eyes, what I'm doing here, this late, whether it means anything. Then the smile comes up again, that automatic warmth version, and he says, "Late night again, Shane?" I keep my eyes on the copy machine. "Quarterly review cycle," I say, "always runs long." He looks at the documents feeding through the machine. I have positioned myself so the content faces away from him, which I hope looks natural, and probably doesn't. He says, "You know, I've been meaning to say, Ilya speaks well of your team. He's mentioned the Hargrove analysis specifically." A pause. "Are you working on something related to that?" "Routine documentation for the review cycle," I say. Another pause. I can feel him assessing the gap between what I'm saying and what's true. "Of course," he says, finally. "Don't work too late." He leaves. I stand in front of the copy machine for 30 seconds, not looking at anything. Then I gather the documents and go back downstairs. I tell Ilya about it that evening. He listens without interrupting. Then he says, he's going to move faster now. He knows something is being built. "How do we move faster than faster?" I ask. And he does something I haven't seen him do in 4 days of working together. He pauses, not the thinking pause, not the processing pause, a genuine human pause, where the control slips just slightly and something tired shows through. He says, "I'm working on that." I look at him, the actual him, not the CEO, not the title,
sitting across a round table in a sixth-floor conference room with a cup of tea that's gone cold, with the weight of something enormous and private pressing on him. And I want very badly to say something useful, not strategic, just human. What I say is, he doesn't know what you have. He knows something is being built, but he doesn't know the shape of it. That's still an advantage. Ilya looks at me, that full, lit room look. Yes, he says, it is. The fourth night. Rain steady against the glass. The printer has finished its run. Papers settling. A long, unforced quiet between two people who have stopped pretending they are here only for the work. It starts with a mistake.
Not mine, or not entirely. I'm reviewing the board communication archive Diana pulled, and I find, tucked behind a distribution list from 18 months ago, Scott Aldrin's name on a firm-wide internal access log. Not as a guest, as someone with registered credentials. He had a visitor clearance code that had been quietly upgraded at some point to something with broader permissions. I flag it without thinking and say out loud, "When did Scott get internal access to the communications server?" The room goes very quiet. Not the working quiet, the other kind. I look up. Ilya is looking at the page I'm holding. His expression has closed in that particular way I've learned to recognize. Not coldness, but the careful management of something he hasn't decided yet whether to let out. I put the page down. "I'm sorry," I say. "That was clumsy." "No," he says. Then, after a moment, "It's relevant documentation. Note it." I note it. We work for another 20 minutes without speaking. The rain continues. At some point, Ilya gets up, refills his tea, and comes back. And when he sits down, he doesn't open his laptop again. He looks at the window. I look at my spreadsheet. I am very carefully not looking at him. Then he says, "I met Scott at an industry conference 4 years ago, in Copenhagen, of all places." I stop typing. I don't say anything. "I don't attend those events for the networking," he continues. "I attend because occasionally someone presents a paper or a structural model that's worth the flight, and the rest of the time I sit at the back and read. Scott sat down next to me during a panel I was trying to tune out and said without introduction, 'This speaker has been presenting the same thesis for 6 years with incrementally adjusted vocabulary. It's impressive in a dispiriting way.' And then he opened a book. I wait. "We talked for 40 minutes after the panel ended," Ilya says. I want to be precise about this because I think the precision matters. He wasn't performing for me. Or, if he was, it was the most technically sophisticated performance I've encountered, which functionally amounts to the same thing as authenticity when you're in the middle of it. He was curious, genuinely, it seemed. He asked questions and then listened to the answers, which sounds like a low bar, but is, in practice, remarkably rare. He made me feel..." He stops. He turns the teacup slightly on the table, a half rotation, his version of a pause. "He made me feel legible," he says, "like someone had looked at the actual contents and found them interesting. Not the title, not the firm, the contents." I understand this exactly. I understand it so precisely that it takes deliberate effort to keep my face neutral, which is a new experience for me, wanting to protect someone from knowing how well I understand their vulnerability. "We were in the same city for 3 more days," Ilya says. "By the end of the conference, I knew I wanted to see him again. That is not something that happens to me regularly. When I got back to the city, I found reasons to. He was in private equity consulting at the time, smaller firms, restructuring work, nothing that overlapped with Ventus in any problematic way. We were careful about that initially. We were professional about it." "When did that change?" I ask, careful about the tone, not prying, just present. "About 8 months in, he lost his primary client," Ilya says. "The firm he was consulting for restructured internally. It wasn't his fault. It was a market shift and a board decision above his level. But he was suddenly unmoored. He'd built something, and it had been removed from under him. I knew that feeling." A pause. "I offered him a position." "At Ventus."
A consultancy role initially, advisory. It was a genuine offer. He was good at what he did, and I believed in the work, but I won't claim that personal feeling had nothing to do with it. It did. I wanted him closer. I thought having him in the building would be... I thought it would be simpler somehow.
Was it?
Ilya looks at the window. For a while. He was good in the role, perceptive. He understood structural problems quickly, and he had a way of presenting findings that the board responded well to. He was easy in the rooms where I'm not, with people who need warmth to feel respected. He filled a gap I knew I had. There's no self-pity in the way he says it. It's just accurate. He is naming a thing he knows about himself without excusing it or inflating it. The next year, Ilya says, I gave him more access, expanded his clearance, let him sit in on board sessions that weren't his portfolio because he asked, and the rationale was sound. He said he needed the broader context to give good advisory guidance. I believed him. A beat. I wanted to believe him. That's the part I've been sitting with. There's a version.
Trust that is genuine and well-placed, and there's a version that is just the emotional need to have trusted someone correctly. I'm not entirely certain which version I was operating in. What kind of access did you give him? I ask, very quietly. Ilya looks at me. Significant. He had visibility on acquisition pipeline targets before announcements. He knew the Hargrove strategy before the board did. He knew the Carver exit terms. He knew... He stops. Resets. He knew everything I knew about where the firm was going and how we planned to get there. I shared it with him the way you share things with someone you've decided is on your side. Not strategically, personally. The rain moves against the glass. I think about the access log I found, the upgraded credentials. I think about how long a person would need to be inside a firm with those credentials to understand which board members were persuadable and which weren't. The cheating, Ilya says, and the word is very flat in his mouth, stripped of drama by the effort of saying it plainly. I found out approximately 4 months ago. Not through any dramatic revelation, I found a pattern of inconsistencies. Times, stories, small discrepancies in the logistics of his days that, once I noticed the first one, I couldn't stop noticing. I didn't confront it immediately because I wanted to be wrong. I spent 6 weeks trying to find an alternative explanation for a set of facts that had no alternative explanation. I am very still. When I did confront it, he didn't deny it, Ilya says. He apologized, extensively. He said it was over, that it had meant nothing, that it was a symptom of feeling peripheral to my life and to the firm, even with the access I'd given him. He said that what he really wanted was to be more central, not less. He said he wanted a role in the firm's leadership, not advisory, operational. And you? I said no, Ilya says. Not as punishment, because it wasn't appropriate to the structure, and because I realized for the first time that my personal feeling for him and my professional judgment about him were 2 different evaluations, and they were arriving at 2 different conclusions. That's when he started planning the vote, I say. Almost certainly yes. We sit with that for a moment. The shape of it. A man who was let in completely, given access, given trust, given the whole interior, and who spent that access counting the architecture of a way out that would leave him holding everything. He tried to take the house, Ilya says. And this comes out differently from everything else. Flatter. Something that hasn't been fully processed yet. My property. He consulted a lawyer, without my knowledge, about cohabitation claims, about what could be demonstrated as a shared primary residence. He'd been in the apartment for 2 years. He thought... Ilya stops, turns the teacup again. He thought there was a case. Was there? No, Ilya says. Everything is in my name. It was always in my name. I'm not careless about documentation, even in my personal life. It's just the fact of it. That while I was trying to decide whether to believe his apology, he was consulting a lawyer about my apartment. That's a particular thing to know about a person. The particular thing it is, I don't say this, is that it describes someone who was never, at any point, operating from the same set of priorities as the person they were with. Someone for whom the relationship was also a position. I'm sorry, I say, and I mean it in the plainest possible way.
not as a social reflex, not as a pivot to the next thing, just as the bare acknowledgement that something genuinely terrible happened to someone who deserved better. Ilya looks at me. You don't need to say that. I know. I'm saying it because it's true. A pause. Then, you have a very precise relationship with truth-telling, Shane. I find it simplest. I say. Most people find it complicated. Most people are hoping for a different outcome than the true one. I find it easier to start from what's actually there. He looks at me in that way. The full way, the lit room way, and I see something move through his expression that I can't name but want to. It's something like recognition, something like the specific relief of being understood by someone who isn't trying to get anything from you in return for the understanding. He says, what he couldn't take from me, and I want to say this clearly because I've been deciding how I feel about the last 4 years, and I think this is the center of it. What he couldn't take from me was what was built here. The work, the firm, the decisions I made and the analysis that backed them, and the people who put their actual effort into this place because they believed in what we were doing. He could try to take the position. He could try to take the structure. He couldn't touch the substance. And the substance is what I care about. Yes. And then, because I'm sitting across from him in a conference room that has become, over 4 nights, the most honest room in my professional life, I say, and that's also why he couldn't take you, however much access he had, because the part of you that matters, the way you think, the way you see, the way you're the same person in every room, that's not a credential. He couldn't copy it and he couldn't transfer it. It's just yours.
Ilya is very still. Then he says, so quietly I almost miss it over the rain, "That is the kindest thing anyone has said to me in quite a long time." "It's not kind," I say. "It's just accurate." He looks at me for a long moment. "You keep saying that. You keep giving me accurate things to say." And the room is quiet again. But it's the good kind of quiet now, the kind that isn't hiding anything, that isn't waiting for the other shoe. Just 2 people at the end of a long day that was also a long week, that was also something neither of us quite has the vocabulary for yet. After a moment, Ilya opens his laptop. "We should finish the archive log," he says. "If Scott had access to the pipeline targets, we need to document the exact scope and dates. Marcus will need it." "Right," I say. I open my spreadsheet. "We work until midnight. When I leave," he says, "get some sleep." I say, "You too." He says, "I'll try." And I believe him, which is different from believing he will. But trying is where you start. I know something about that. On the 4th day, Diana pulls me aside at 2 p.m. and says, in the voice she reserves for things that are not requests, "You've been running modified versions of the Hargrove analysis for 4 days. I'm not asking what for. I'm telling you that if you need a second set of eyes, I'm available." I look at her. She looks at me. She says, "I've worked for this firm for 9 years, Shane. I was here when Ilya put together the board structure. Whatever's happening, and I'm not asking, some of us would like the outcome to be one we can live with." I tell her I'll let her know. That evening, I tell Ilya about Diana. He thinks about it for a moment. Then he says, "Quan, she's good. Ask her about the original board notification records from the Hargrove onboarding period. She'll know where they are." The way he says it, "she'll know where they are," I ask, "Did you give her those records?" He looks at me. I give good people information they might need someday. I don't always tell them why. I think about that for a long moment. Is that what you did with me, with the Carver footnotes comment? "That was different," he says. And then, before I can follow up, "That was just the truth." I go back to the analysis. On the 5th day, Marcus Bell comes to the 6th floor. I've been told to be there. Ilya introduces me as the analyst who built the documentation trail, and Marcus, who is 60-something, silver-haired, with the slightly rumpled look of a man who used to be more idealistic and hasn't entirely given that up, shakes my hand and says, "You're brave or you're reckless. Possibly both." I say, "Both, probably." He looks at Ilya and says something that I'll carry for a long time. "Where did you find him?" And Ilya says without missing a beat, "He found me." Marcus presents what he's been able to build on the procedural violations of the canceled emergency session. It's solid, not airtight, but solid enough to create doubt, and doubt is leverage. The issue is that Scott, when he calls the second session, will do it correctly. He'll dot every procedural letter. Whatever advantage the first attempt gave us, the second attempt won't replicate it. What we need is the underlying argument, the case that Ilya's decisions were not the unilateral power grabs Scott characterized them as, but were in fact informed, documented, and made in the best interest of the firm. The analysis is that case. My analysis, Diana's archival records, the trail Ilya built before anyone thought it would need to be a trail. Marcus looks at the documentation spread across the conference table and says, "This is enough. If we can get it in front of the full board before Scott calls his session, this is enough." Ilya says, "Can you get me a full board meeting before the end of the week?" Marcus looks at him for a moment. Then he says, "You'll owe me something considerable." "Name it," Ilya says. 2 weeks in your Lisbon property," Marcus says. "Done." Thursday night. The full board meeting is tomorrow morning at 9. Marcus has called it under a standard quarterly agenda item, nothing that would signal to Scott what's coming, because the session is procedurally Marcus's call to make, and Scott can't object to it without exposing that he knows something was coming. It's a narrow move, but it's clean. I'm in the 6th floor conference room for the last time, printing the final version of the documentation package. Ilya's there. He's reading through the summary I prepared. 12 pages, clear and spare, no excess. And the room has the particular quality that comes from the end of a long effort. Not relief, not yet. Something more like held breath before release. He finishes reading. He sets the pages down. He says, "This is excellent work, Mercer." "Shane," I say, before I can stop myself. He looks up. "What?" "You can call me Shane," I say. "We've been in this room for 5 evenings. Mercer feels distant." He looks at me for a moment. Then, very slightly, something in his expression changes. Not a smile exactly. Something quieter and more careful than a smile. He says, "Shane." Just my name, just the sound of it in his voice, which is low and measured, and tonight slightly tired in a way he'd never let anyone see in a meeting. I feel the thing in my chest that I'd been refusing to name do something unmistakable, and I look at the printer. "Can I ask you something?" I say. "You've been asking me things for 5 days." "A different kind of thing." A pause. "Go ahead." I collect the printed pages. I square them against the table. Then I say, "How long have you known about Scott?" The silence is different from the working silences we've built over the past week. This one has weight in it. After a moment, he says, "Long enough that I should have addressed it before it reached this point. That's my failure, not yours." "He's very good at appearing to be something else," I say. "Yes," Ilya says, "he is." And then, "The thing about people who perform warmth is that they understand, functionally, how warmth works. They've studied it. Scott knows exactly how to create the conditions that make trust feel automatic. It's—" He stops. He looks at the window, at the rain and the blurred lights. "It's a very effective strategy." I think about the lobby smile, the way he'd said my name in the hallway. Shane, right? The accounting of it. "Yes," I say, "it is." We're both quiet for a moment. Then I say, because I need to say something true, and I've been saying true things in this room for 5 days, and I'm not sure I know how to stop. For what it's worth, I think the reason it worked for as long as it did isn't because you were naive. It's because you extended the same respect you extend to everyone. You decided someone deserved your trust and you didn't interrogate it. That's not a character flaw. He looks at me, the full, lit room look. Isn't it? It's the same quality that makes you readable in the good sense, I say. You don't perform, you extend. When you think someone is worth the effort, they know it. I've seen how your team works. They'd do anything for you. That's not fear. That's the other thing. I realize slightly too late that this is an intimate thing to say to your employer at 10 o'clock at night in an empty conference room, and I pick up the documentation package and hold it in front of me like a shield made of paper, which is becoming a habit. Ilya says, quietly, "You've been watching me for 3 years. Everyone watches the CEO," I say. "Not like that," he says. The rain against the glass, the hum of the building, the printer having finished its job, gone silent. I say, "No, not like that." Ilya looks at me for a long moment. Then he says, "Get some sleep, Shane. Tomorrow is going to be long." I go home. I do not sleep. The board meeting is at 9. I am not in it, I'm not board member, and I'm not senior enough to be in the room, and this is the correct and appropriate situation that I have nonetheless spent 72 hours dreading. I'm in the bullpen. I am looking at a spreadsheet. I am not reading it. Diana sits down across from me at 8:50 and says, "The documentation package went to all 12 board members at 8:15 this morning." I know, I sent it. "At Marcus Bell's instruction," she adds, "and there's a question in it." "Yes," I say. She looks at me. Then she says, "I found those notification records from the Hargrove onboarding period, the ones from the board communication archive." "I know, you gave them to me Tuesday." "I've worked here 9 years," she says, "and that is the cleanest documentation trail I have ever seen someone build in 4 days." 5, I say. She gives me a look of deep, affectionate exasperation. "Go get coffee, Shane. The 9 o'clock is going to be at least 2 hours, and you need to not just sit there staring at the wall." I get coffee. I come back. I stare at the wall. At 11:17, my phone lights up. It's a message from a number I've saved as Petra, Ilya's office. It says, "Conference Room B, 10th floor, now." Conference Room B, the same room where this started 6 days ago. The heavy oak door, the sliver of light. Except this time I'm walking toward it and I know what's on the other side. I open the door. The room is nearly empty. Marcus Bell is there, sitting at the table, looking like a man who has just survived something and is still calibrating. Ilya is standing at the window. He's not facing me when I come in. He's looking at the city, which is sharp and clear today, the rain gone and the November sky a clean, cold blue. He hears me come in. I know he hears me because he goes very still. Then he turns. And I know before he speaks, because his face has done something unfamiliar. Not the professional mask, not the working focus, not the careful quiet of our evenings in Conference Room 6. Something easier. Not quite relief. Something on the other side of it. Marcus says, "The motion was defeated, 8-4. The procedural documentation, combined with the analysis you put together, was sufficient to demonstrate that the emergency session last Tuesday was not only procedurally flawed, but was motivated by a conflict of interest, specifically Scott's plan to assume the CEO role himself. Several board members who had initially been persuaded shifted when they saw the trail. Scott is no longer an authorized representative of the firm in any capacity effective this morning. He'll be pursuing whatever recourse he pursues." I hear this. I understand it. I stand in the doorway with my hand on the doorframe and I look at Ilya, who is looking at me. Marcus looks between us. He says, "I'll give you both a moment," and he picks up his folder and leaves with the particular efficiency of a man who has spent 60-something years knowing when he's the third person in a two-person conversation. The door closes. The room is quiet. Ilya says, "You can come in properly, Shane. You're not going to need to run." I come in properly. I sit down in one of the chairs at the table because I'm not entirely sure my legs are reliable. He sits across from me. The city is bright and cold through the glass. I say, "It worked." "It worked," he says. We sit with that for a moment. Then I say, "What happens now?" He considers. I issue a statement to the firm. The board works on a formal motion addressing the conflict of interest provisions in the operating agreement. I have several conversations I've been deferring. That sounds like a lot of structured unpleasantness. "Yes," he says, "it does." And then with that ghost of an expression that is not quite a smile but is something in its neighborhood, "It will be significantly more manageable than the last week." "High bar," I say. "You said it," he says. I look at the table. Then I say, because I am apparently incapable of leaving something unfinished, "Are you all right? Actually? Not operationally. Actually." He's quiet for a moment. Then, "That's not a question I receive very often." "I know," I say. "You don't make it easy." "No," he says. "I don't." Another pause. I'll tell you something I don't typically tell people. Not because it's private, it is, but that's not the reason. I don't tell people because most people want the answer to that question to be simple. They want to hear fine, and they want to accept it and move on. You're asking because you actually want to know. Yes, I say. I am. He looks at me. Then the honest answer is, I don't know yet. The last 6 days have been, procedurally, professionally, I understand them. I know how to operate in a crisis. I know how to build a case and move resources and anticipate second-order consequences. What I'm less practiced at is the part that comes after, the part where something that was supposed to be personal turned out to be strategic. That takes longer to process. Yes, I say. It does. You sound like you know. I'm fairly good at identifying when something is genuine and convincing myself it might not be, I say, and fairly slow at the reverse. He looks at me steadily. The reverse being, I think about the last 6 days, the green tea gone cold, the footnotes, the full lit room look, the sound of my name in his voice, low and slightly tired at 10 o'clock in conference room 6. Identifying when something is genuine, I say, and letting myself believe it. The silence that follows is not the working silence, not the procedural silence. It's the kind of silence that forms when two people are in the same room with the same thought, and neither has decided yet whether to say it. Ilya says, I owe you a significant professional debt. I know, I say. That's not what I'm talking about. I know, he says. We're quiet again. The city is very blue and bright through the glass. I say, I want to be clear about something. What I did this week, warning you, the analysis, the documentation, all of it, I didn't do it because I wanted anything from you. I want you to know that first. I didn't do it because of how I feel. I did it because it was the right thing to do for someone who deserved better than what was being done to him. I know that too, he says. And his voice is quiet and certain in a way that means he's been watching me the same way I've been watching him, which is something I'd been carefully not hoping for. The how I feel part, I say, is separate. And I'm not saying it because I expect anything. I'm saying it because I've been saying true things in rooms with you for 5 days, and I'm not sure I know how to stop. Ilya is looking at me in a way that is entirely different from any look I've cataloged in 3 years of peripheral observation. He says, tell me the true thing then. I take a breath. I think you are the most genuinely rigorous person I've ever met. And I mean that technically. Your thinking, the way you approach a problem, the way you never perform a conclusion before you've earned it. But it's not just the thinking. You're the same all the way through. In the meetings and in the conference room at 10 p.m. with cold tea, there's no gap between the versions. I've watched you for 3 years, and I've never caught you being someone different in different rooms. And in a building full of people who are performing constantly, that is... I stop. Say it, he says. That is the most attractive quality I have ever encountered in a person, I say. And I'm aware this is profoundly ill-timed and professionally irregular, and you've just been through something significant. And I don't need you to say anything. I just needed to say the true thing. Ilya is quiet for a long moment. The city is bright through the glass. The building hums. Then he says, you know what I noticed the first time I read your footnotes? I look at him. What? That whoever wrote them was not trying to impress anyone. They were trying to be accurate. In a field full of people performing certainty, there was someone just trying to tell the truth about what they knew and didn't know. I had Petra find out your name. I stare at him. You had Petra find out my name? You were a junior analyst, he says. We hadn't been introduced. I wanted to know. And then you told me in the elevator? I had been waiting for an appropriate context, he says. And there is something so fundamentally, recognizably him about this. The patience, the precision, the doing of the right thing at the right time and not before, that I feel something unlock in my chest that I didn't know was locked. Ilya, I say. Because I've earned the right to his name too, I think, after this week. Shane, he says. And in the space of those 2 words, something is finished and something else begins. He stands up. He crosses the room. He is deliberate about it the way he is deliberate about everything. Not rushed, not hesitant, just clear and purposeful and entirely himself. He stops in front of me and he says quietly, "I'd like to see if the thing that's developed between us this week has a shape outside of a crisis. I'd like to find out who you are when there's no emergency." "I'm considerably less interesting," I say. "I count the steps between places. I rebuild spreadsheets at 2 a.m. for the pleasure of it. I have very strong opinions about footnotes." "I know. That's why I'm asking." I look at him, the full, lit room version of him, which I understand now is not a special mode. It's just what happens when Ilya Vaskov decides you're worth his complete attention and you're close enough to see it. "Okay," I say. "Yes." He holds out his hand. Not a handshake, something slower, more deliberate, palm slightly upward, an offering of a very different kind. I look at it for a moment. Then I put my hand in his. His grip is warm and still. Outside the window, the city is sharp and cold and blue, and somewhere below us, the firm is going on with its Wednesday in the same way it always does, and the board members are filing out of a meeting that changed everything, and Scott Eldrin is somewhere doing whatever people do when their strategy fails. And none of that is this room. None of it is this hand in mine. None of it is the particular quality of an afternoon that tilts quietly and permanently in a new direction. I say, "For the record, the footnotes on the Carver deck were the best part of that presentation." He looks at me, and this time it is, definitively, a smile. Small and real and entirely without performance. "Yes," he says. "They were." 3 weeks later. I still count the steps between places. 41 from the bullpen to the executive copy suite. 23 from the lobby to the stairwell door. 11 from the elevator to Petra's desk, which I know now because I've been walking it more often. Some things have changed. Skok is gone. Formally, professionally, with the specific finality of someone whose conflict of interest has been documented and acted upon. The board has a new composition agreement pending. Marcus Bell is going to Portugal in the spring and has not stopped mentioning it. Diana gave me a look last week when I arrived 10 minutes late with a green tea I hadn't purchased for myself. The look had layers. I pretended not to understand them. She pretended to accept this. We have a functional relationship. What I can tell you about Ilya, now that I know him outside a crisis, is this. He is quieter than I expected. He reads on his lunch break, actual physical books, which surprises everyone except me. He has an opinion about everything, but states it only once and doesn't repeat it. He has, apparently, for the past 3 years, known the name of every analyst on every team in the firm, which I told Diana about, and she said, "I know, he knew mine in my first week." And she said it the way you say something that is not quite a secret, but has felt like one. He calls me Shane without prompting now. This continues to do the thing to my chest that it did the first time. I still count the steps, but the counting is different now. It's less about managing anxiety and more about attention. Noticing where I am, how far from where I started, how different the room looks when you're in it with someone who has decided to see you clearly. 41 steps from the bullpen to the copy suite. The hallway of the executive wing at night has that held breath quality, the one that means the day's needs have been released and the building is just being a building again. I know this hallway. I know the carpet and the light and the gap under the oak door of Conference Room B. I know what I heard through that door 3 weeks ago and what I chose to do with it. I know that choosing to tell the truth, even when it's costly, even when the outcome is uncertain, even when you're standing in a hallway at 9:47 p.m. with a folder of copies pressed to your chest like a paper shield, choosing to tell the truth is always the architecture of something. You just don't always know at the time what you're building. I know now. 41 steps. I take them. The end.